Hello, Facebook. Happy Friday. Hope you all had a productive week. We had one or two things going on here this weekend. I hope you managed to stay out of the storm last weekend. As I may have mentioned, was driving my daughter, who goes to college in the Midwest, back to school and managed to hit some of the prime snowstorm on Saturday. So that was interesting. But before I get any further, I want to make sure that I give a big thanks to all the those who work to keep our roads safe and clear. And keep us from danger and keep the power on. They do a remarkable job, particularly in our neck of the woods where we have so many microclimates and conditions can vary so greatly from one town to another. So we are really lucky that we have such dedicated people who help us keep safe. So big thanks to them. So we had a few things going on here this week. We had our first session, which is to say the entire assembly sat and considered and passed legislation. It was unusual. This was bipartisan legislation proposed by the leadership of both the Republican and Democratic caucuses to support, to help federal workers who are, under the shutdown being forced to work with no pay. And some of them are in really sensitive positions. I spoke with many of them when I was traveling through airports in the Midwest this weekend, coming back from my drive with my daughter. And these are essential employees, meaning that their work is really important to keeping us safe, and they're not being paid, and it's not fair. And so Connecticut acted to pass legislation that provided no interest loan guarantees to federal workers who are not being paid. It's a public-private partnership. The loans are, in fact, there are already 15 banks that are participating in the program, which is really fantastic. And Connecticut guarantees a portion of that so that we can provide no interest loans to these workers, and so they can take care of their obligations and care for their families and, live lives of like the rest of us. So it was really an honor to be able to do something like that, and to do something that was with such strong bipartisan support. I felt it was a really great way to start off. So that was a powerful thing to happen on Tuesday. The rest of what's happening at the moment is, I think, as I mentioned last week, Friday was the deadline for individual legislators to submit concepts for legislation. And again, this is very rarely a fully drafted bill. It's usually a concept or an idea and a purpose that an individual legislator or legislators want to work on. I submitted several, and I supported and signed on to those of several other legislators as well. Because there were so many, there are thousands submitted, and not all of those will become law. That process takes a little while, especially because as humans, you can imagine that a good number of legislators, pushed it off until the last minute on Friday. So a lot of things went in on Friday afternoon. I was about to say like me, but my only excuse that I didn't submit it on Friday is I had to leave early in order to drive my daughter to out west. So that takes a while because they combine certain bills, they have to get signed. There's a certain process they have to move their way through. So, for example, if any of you have visited my website, there's a tab there that says legislation. If you click on that, you will see some of the legislation that I've supported, but not all of it. So I just clicked on it myself a few minutes ago and was checked in because there were some things missing, and was told not to worry, that it takes a little while to work through the system. And once it does, I hope to go through and look at that list with you. So, for example, what's happening now, I had a couple, the Judiciary Committee and Environment Committee are both starting to look at those bills that have been submitted, to combine some of them, to decide which ones that they want to make sure they hold, they move forward for consideration and schedule public hearings for under the name of the individual legislator or legislators who submitted them. And some of them that may have been submitted by legislators get taken up by the committee, and so they become what are known as committee bills. And so we had, for example, in the Environment Committee today, some bills on animal control shelters, smoking and vaping on beaches and state parks. Those will have hearings later on. And then others that will be adopted by the whole committee on things from honey and maple syrup, leakage from gas pipelines, styrofoam trays, all manner of things. And so the votes that we had on those are really mostly procedural votes. There's a tiny bit of discussion on the substance, but usually this is about agreeing as a committee to hold hearings on these bills and to give them due consideration. And so that decision got made. So we had a similar meeting in Judiciary, where we also voted to move certain bills forward. And in Judiciary, the added responsibility that we have at the moment is moving the confirmation of judges forward. As many of you may know, in Connecticut, we do not have lifetime appointment for judges, so we have to vote to renew their terms. So we listened to the testimony of 4 different judges who had been submitted for renomination for 8-year terms, who serve on different benches throughout the state, and we voted to move those nominations forward to the full assembly, which will happen. That will be one of the first things that the assembly takes up, in addition to various bills that we will also be looking at. And it's a long list at this stage of the game. So appropriations, just an aside, is a little bit different because we are waiting for the governor's budget, which gets submitted later in February. So my time relative to appropriations right now is to get up to speed as much as possible on the budget and on the various pieces of it, to review past year's budgets, look at trends, understand how things like the hospital tax works. It's complicated. And essentially spend a lot of time with my other vice chair in the Office of Fiscal Analysis, where we have incredible resources of people who are deeply knowledgeable and are willing to say things 2 or 3 times so that we can get all the details down and learn how to manage that process. So also this week, there's still the last of the sort of freshman-y workshops. Just this morning I had a training on sexual harassment, which I have gone through in other capacities before, but it's always good. It's the best part of it. I mean, we of course get the policies, but it is a great opportunity to have a conversation with other legislators about how to be on the lookout for someone that you work with that may be dealing with some significant stress in their employment situation, and how to make sure that we're paying attention to all the details, because sometimes, as we know from many stories that have come up in the Me Too movement recently, there are a lot of reasons why people don't report these things, because they feel that they're going to be punished. And so when you are a manager or in a position of responsibility, it's your job to make sure you're paying attention to those little signals along the way, so that you can maybe pick things up when they're still small, and if they've and get them reported to the right people so they can get resolved. So having that conversation with fellow legislators is really important. And then on things like the Freedom of Information Act, the bottom line of which is that we all assume that everything we do is public, and all of our debate on anything are held in public hearings, and that's an important obligation of being a legislator. But it's good to understand how that process works as well. And then I last night got to go to the Farm Bureau dinner, which it's always fun to be with FFA students that's Future Farmers of America, from various parts of the region, which is really fun to hear from them, and about their dedication and work ethic and presentation skills. They're just a marvel, and they're going to be some serious leaders going forward. As well as some really delicious food, which is always nice. And we also, before that dinner, I got the chance to bring a few regional agricultural leaders together to meet with some people from Congresswoman Jahana Hayes' office, because she in particular really wanted, having been assigned to the Agriculture Committee, which I know she's very excited about, to hear about, in particular, how the shutdown was affecting local agriculture. And it is the Department of Agriculture does a lot of it assists local agriculture in a lot of ways. It also does a lot of grants that help rural areas in general. So it's affecting affecting grants to towns, small towns. It's also affecting the dairy industry pretty remarkably. And so we got to hear from them on what they're facing, and it's not just funding that's at issue. It's also basic information. Dairy farmers in particular work in a highly controlled market, and they are dependent on information, data coming from the Department of Agriculture so that they can make decisions, get credit, decide planting schedules and things like that, and they're not getting that data. So that is a real cost to them as well. It's not just directly, in terms of financial aid. So that was a really good meeting, and I'm glad to have stronger contacts with many of our agricultural leaders as a result of that meeting. I also wanted to thank you all I posted a little video of my commute the other day, because sometimes I go when the sun is rising, which is quite beautiful. And I got a lot of great podcast recommendations, and I'm already a big podcast listener because I both when I drive and when I run, when I used to run, not sure I run anymore. Anyway, you sent me a lot of great ones that I hadn't heard of, and I thought I'd heard of everything. So I'm almost looking forward to my commute. Although today I'm trying to miss traffic, so I'm going to take off in a few minutes and do the rest of my work at home. So this weekend, I will admit, looking forward to not driving any further than Litchfield. A bunch of events in district. I'm really happy to be in district. As I mentioned, I think last time, I am hoping to get my schedule under control so that I am in district one day of the week every week, but that's been hard. But at least I'm there this weekend, and I have several things that I'm looking forward to going to, so I hope I see you there, and I hope you all have a great weekend. Thanks.